Sri Aurobindo lists the various steps that evolution has taken to create units, starting from the individual, the family, then the tribe, and then the regional and the national identities, and then the human identity as one humanity. Of all of these intermediate steps, and perhaps even other sub-steps, of all of these intermediate steps, he says, nature has chosen, I'm not sure if he says nature or the divine will, but we can even see both as equivalent. Nature, let's take it as nature, has chosen to preserve only three. From the individual identity to the group human identity, there are three steps: family, nationality, and humanity. All the rest will fade away. Or they may exist subservient to these. And it's interesting to observe, and I suppose we can all do it as our own independent individual explorations, to see how these three are somehow seen to be stronger, while others are breaking apart. And where these three are being weakened, there's a reaction and an attempt to consolidate on these levels. But I suppose this describes a process which will take at least 100 years and will develop over the coming 100 years. But through these we also find a growing interdependence, which is more directly the action of the supramental. Being a consciousness of oneness, while it supports the most rich diversity, it holds it as facets of its own oneness. And so the increasing sense of oneness in humanity is the most concrete and the most direct change of the supramental on the human mind. Where 50 years ago we would have said, my nationality first. Today we speak of my humanity first. And the nations have to submit to this larger truth that we feel. The governments resisting, human beings at a grassroots bypassing governments. Creating frameworks expressive of the truth that we feel within us, even not always mentally formulated, but subliminally sensed. And we create frameworks for this kind of a interchange, the most concrete of which is the internet. The internet was not created by governments. It emerged from a grassroots process bypassed governments. Governments were caught by surprise and tried to regulate it but could not. Some still do, but they cannot eventually. Being essentially an expression of the commonality of the human people in technology, it cannot be controlled by any central agency. And we find ways to bypass any control devices. You cannot restrict on the internet anything. Everybody is able to bypass any restrictions. And the change is such that even if all governments come together and say, together we will restrict our people, it won't work. So that's one physical, I will say, organ of social expression of this deeper unity. There are others which are also growing, one of which is the mix of media. The media broadcast itself transcends national boundaries. It's a satellite broadcast, you cannot stop anybody from receiving. But there is a rapid exchange of media across the world. When a movie is released in one place, it's available all over the world, at least through the internet, if nothing else. It's translated into so many languages. People are interested in watching a different cultural value. Where earlier they were seen as oddities, today they're seen with interest. So there is in the human consciousness an urge to reach out and connect and absorb the experience of other cultures and values and perhaps their best. Which is what the mother anticipated in Auroville by asking for the pavilions of each culture to be represented here. Because the future, she said, would be for each culture to share its best with the whole world without losing its uniqueness. So a single space in which all cultures are available. Very crudely, this form is now seen all over the world in malls, where you get a food court in which 5 or 6 different kinds of cuisines are available in one space, and you can pick and choose from any, try them out, mix them, and yet the distinctiveness of each remains. It's a very crude starting point, catching the most obvious form of greed in the human being. But still, it's a good starting point, and it will widen, including even forms of dress, and most important will be the psychological values that each culture has to share with others. So this growing interdependence has taken on many forms, but ultimately all the external organized forms, including economic, are expressions of a psychological need felt within us. Who made the effort? Nobody. No individual, no government, no educational system or book has made a conscious effort to create this sense of wanting to connect with the whole. It's emerged from within the heart of humanity, by the pressure of the supramental consciousness. Its result has been the creation of educational tools and other technological means to express what we already feel. But it didn't start from there. The human species itself, beginning to feel this sense of oneness, can be and is often assisted by problems, difficulties, dangers. Because it's part of the human makeup that when we together face a problem, we come together most easily. I find the recent large-scale natural disasters to be an interesting point of observation, in which you see the groups suddenly coming together, bypassing differences. And then when they fall back, the problem has passed, when they fall back into their individualities of whatever level of unit of organization, they are no more the same. There's a connection built during the time of crisis which is not lost, and things continue to happen. There is a rapidity of change in new ideas, hopes, possibilities, experiments taking place, and all of these are part of that increase of the evolutionary pace of growth. In all these, for us particularly here, the recognition of the supramental consciousness as an active force and power, making this, assisting and guiding it, is of great importance. In the rest of the world, these changes are seen almost as a social or accidental process. But for us, there is this difference that there is a consciousness that's making it, actively leading it. It makes a difference. It makes a difference because we can open to that consciousness deliberately. In the rest of the world, where this awareness is not there, there are still a few individuals who sense this new consciousness. They speak of a new age. But the idea of new age is there is an age waiting to happen. It's sensed indirectly, but the reality of it is not known. And therefore the mind's active participation, submitting to it consciously, is not so easily possible. For us it is. And that's why it is here that the most important and the most rapid change can be made most smoothly. In relating to the supramental consciousness, there are two approaches one can take. One is to view it as a vast, impersonal, cosmic power that is here working in everything, through every form, as directly as it can, that the form can bear. A finite form meeting the infinity of the supramental would not be able to bear it. It would burst apart. The earth itself could have shattered if this descent had taken place too soon. And therefore it needs an intermediate support, sometimes of 1 or 2 layers, for that action to be diminished and diluted before it can act on finiteness. The intermediate levels are what Sri Aurobindo calls the overmental and the intuitive. So it is only through the overmind or the intuition that the supermind can act on things as they are. But it's acting. But we can relate to it, allow it to build in us these two intermediate levels of intuition and the overmind. But this is the way you would normally see it when you see it as a cosmic power. The other way to relate to it, which makes it much more direct, is to know the supramental consciousness as the conscious Shakti of the Divine. The Divine Mother herself as the supramental Shakti meets us directly. And to know her in the form of the Mother, whom we adore, is then the most intimate relationship we can have. In The Mother, the little booklet, Sri Aurobindo describes how the four powers of the Mother, Maheshwari, Mahakali, Mahalakshmi and Mahasaraswati, form in us, establish in us and fuse into one movement in which the supramental Mahashakti herself descends and works in us. Well, this is the key. If we begin by relating to her as the conscious embodiment of the Supreme as the supramental Shakti, our hearts flow out to her in gratitude, in love, in self-giving and devotion. Our minds know her as one who is so close to us, who in fact is the one to whom we surrendered, who has called us here, who has created this space for us, and who presides over all that happens here. And our actions in life can then flow most easily in service and consecration to her. To know her not only as the Divine Mother, as the Divine Shakti, but as the supramental Divine Shakti, is the means by which we can feel ourselves closest to the supramental consciousness. Whichever way we find ourselves more naturally relating to, the idea is to enter into that relation as quickly and as completely as possible. This can take many forms again, a form of concentrated meditation, a form of relation and devotion of heart, a form of work and expression and service, but by whatever means to feel the closeness of the idea or of the feelings, and to allow that closeness to gradually spread to fill the whole being. This is the way by which we place ourselves in touch with that supramental consciousness. And to the extent that we are able to do that, all the change necessary in us is done rapidly. To put it in extreme terms, there's a letter that someone wrote to Sri Aurobindo saying, I was told that if I put myself wholly in the hands of the Mother, then the transformation in me can be done instantly. Sri Aurobindo wrote back saying, yes, that is true. The condition is you have to put yourself wholly in her hands, with nothing resisting. And then of course the transformation is instant. The point is, the parts in us which are open and give ourselves without resistance are the ones which are transformed instantly. But unfortunately not all of us is so conscious and so giving without resistance. That's why there's a process, that's why it takes time. But to the parts which are given to her in this way, the change is instant. The problem is, even as I give myself and the part of me that's in my mind or my heart, most open, most conscious, there is a habit in that part. A habit that tends to bring back that persistence, recurrence and resistance. And if I give that habit itself, then even the habit is changed by her. So starting with whichever part in us is most conscious, most naturally surrendering, we begin. And as she changes that part, her consciousness seeps into the other parts. And seeping into them extends the range of awareness. And it will be a common experience for all of us that as we persist, we become more conscious of things within us we didn't know existed. Tendencies, habits, or even aspirations. We didn't know they existed. We were not conscious of those parts. And it's as if as we proceed, we become more conscious within us. And even as that happens, those parts change. Sometimes the change is extreme enough that if I look back and say, oh, 10 years ago, that's not even me. That's somebody else. I'm a different person now. Don't judge me by what I was then. I don't feel myself anything in common with that. At least in parts of our being, we have this experience. And in this yoga, therefore, we find while the goal is so much more difficult, the result achieved by the effort we put in is so much greater. Because the effort we put in is to put ourselves in her hands, and it is her infinite power that works to make the change in us. Therefore, the result is so much greater. Where is this supramental consciousness today for which Sri Aurobindo and the mother worked? Well, since 1956, it is here, now, in everything. But its action still has to be indirect through these two levels. To the extent that we open to it, its action becomes more direct. Otherwise, it still has to remain indirect. But it's there, and it pushes in and through every single atom. So where is the supramental consciousness? It's here, it fills us. It even fills our body. But it cannot act on the body directly because the body is unconscious. It fills the substance of our life force, prana. It fills the substance of our mind and the subtle inner body. But it cannot act unless that part of our consciousness opens and turns to it and invokes it. Then it acts directly. To the extent we can take. And increasing as we can take more. And it builds our capacity to take in more. Dharana Shakti. As far as Sri Aurobindo and the mother's physical manifestation was concerned, their work was completed. The realization and even the transformation of the human consciousness was taken all the way till the last point of the physical tissue remaining. Even within that, the mother observes that there are many cells in her body which were able to make that transition and open to the divine and accept the divine and so have become immortal effectively. With all this having been established already as a prototype in the collective consciousness, the journey to follow is inevitable. So someone asked the mother, so when will we see the result of the supramental? She said, oh, it's very soon. Just wait for another 1,000 years and it will be obvious to all. Somewhere else she said, she is convinced that the human body itself will be enormously more plastic than anything we can imagine today within 300 years. I was looking at some of the Chinese acrobats live and on TV. And it is unimaginable that the human body can be so supple and so conscious. And the first question I asked them was, how long did it take you to train this? They said 2 years. And I wonder, if we were to dedicate ourselves with the same commitment that they did. Yes, they were younger, the body was still growing, so there was an easier starting point. But in terms of consciousness, even if there is rigidity of other things, in terms of consciousness, we should be able to achieve the same if we commit ourselves to this. And if we do that, then even in the very physical substance, you will have that supramental action pushing, even as it works in the mind and the vital. What prevents us? Only the lack of our effort. Everything else is there and waiting, pushing, even compelling us. And where we resist by lack of effort, lack of interest, or even sometimes revolt, then that pressure pains because we resist. Pain is only the parts in us that resist the push, compelling change. The moment we relax that part and allow the change, there is no tension and no pain. Wherever in life we find a point of pressure that pains, know that it's a part in you that's resisting. Relax, open and offer it. Allow the change there, and you'll find things just flowing rapidly. Nowhere in human history has such a situation been offered to humanity. And once the transition is made into the next grade of consciousness, the effort that is there in nature to make a leap will also subside. This is the point Sri Aurobindo makes. As in the past, in the ape, there was a push to wake up into humanity, and a narrow band of consciousness made that leap with help from above. And then the effort itself subsided. So it will be with humanity. That this narrow band of effort in consciousness terms, making that transition, eventually then the effort will subside. And there will be a gap seen once again. We are among those here who are part of this narrow concentrated effort. A push from nature, a push from our own inmost truths, from our own psychic being and soul. Both are combined, assisting each other. And from above, the supramental pulling. A three-way effort. Soul, nature, and the divine above. And a meeting of these three to make that transition. There is no greater opportunity before or, as we have seen, ever after. This is the single most important life in which we can make extraordinary progress. And sometimes I remind myself when there are other distractions, oh, that would be interesting to see, that would be interesting to experience. I remind myself, we've been through a few million lives doing the same thing. And we might have another few million lives where we can do it again if we want. But this opportunity will not come again. So it's worth it to dedicate ourselves to this effort now. But in spite of that, there are parts in the nature which pull and push. It doesn't matter. The centrality of our being oriented to that, we must remind ourselves and recenter ourselves in that aspiration every day. Otherwise, things tend to pull us out into dispersion or distraction. The renewal must be done every day, even if for a few minutes, in whatever form is most easy for us. For the rest, the help is there. Oh.